Hello, welcome to Coffee with Kathleen. I have a special guest today, and I am so excited. It is my very good friend, Bryan Levenson, who is the CEO and founder of CYTK. And we're here to talk about his leadership journey and whatever. I mean, we're industry friends, so we're probably just going to talk on and on and on, honestly. But I know that you're going to get a lot from this. I can't wait to welcome Bryan.
Hey, everybody. So nice to be here, Kat. Just to let you know, there's coffee in here.
Is there?
Yes.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
I'm using my 12 Days of Fitness cup from Orange Theory as a celebration of the fact that my knee is finally good enough for me to, with some modifications, go back to my favorite exercise classes at Orange Theory. So I'm celebrating that.
That was like 8 months, right?
Oh, I feel like it's been a whole lifetime. I could do a whole podcast, honestly, and maybe I will, on recovery, because we don't tend to see recovery as work. And it is work. It is actually recovery. Once you've got a sort of established fitness practice, is actually harder than working out because you can't work out. It's the absence of something, right? And it's dealing with that while at the same time trying to make progress.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm sure sometimes it's like that at work, but you know that the reason why I wanted to talk to you, Bryan, is because you're a CEO and founder, you're working at a small business. I'm sure that there's been moments where you were like, is this worth it? You know, like, am I going to make it till tomorrow? Am I going to be able to make payroll this next week or whatever? But you are consistently one of the most positive people I've ever met. And you've continued to plow forward. You're starting to see great success. I believe you're turning a big corner, which I'm so stoked about because the things that CYTK is doing is really awesome and amazing. But I am interested in poking below the surface of Bryan to understand how it is that you maintain that positivity.
You know, I think the first thing that we'll talk about that I want to bring up is when I was a kid, when I was a little boy, my father would say to me, I know a lot of dads would tell their children, oh, hey, you know, do well in school, get a good job, you know, go up the ladder. It was that generation. And my dad was, don't ever work for anyone ever. Anyone who you work for will try to make as much money as they possibly can and pay you as little as possible. And that's how the economic system works for folks that want to have careers. And by the way, I'm not saying having a career is, a negative context by any stretch of the imagination. I might actually have been further ahead than I am now if I did the corporate ladder climb. But I think a part of the psychology and setting up that basis to be a successful entrepreneur comes from the roots. So I thought that would be a good place to start, just with that ideology.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Still doesn't totally explain, though, because you could do that in a very, sort of grumpy or authoritarian or non-inclusionary way, right? But actually, as a leader, I think that you're a lovely human being, but you have managed to infuse that into the way that you lead, and you don't let the pressure take you outside of that self that you want to be as a leader, which is, taking everybody's opinions on board and really being thoughtful and considerate and bringing people along and all of the great things that you do. And so how do you maintain that amidst the pressure? I mean, I think that's relevant whether you're climbing the corporate ladder or being an entrepreneur, frankly.
I think our generation, Kat, especially you and I, we came from the Morgan Stanley generation, right? Where very white collared, very professional, very professional in attire, all of those different things, had a specific decorum, a specific natural way of, being successful in the business world. And as I was introduced, to that reality, I was working for Viacom, and I was in one cube among, 40
Yeah.
cubes. And I was sitting there, and I was still pretty young. I was in my late 20s. And our team and our division, we missed EBITDA by basically one penny. And 20% of the staff got laid off, basically, right after that. And the layoff was within the context of just an email was sent, hey, don't come in Monday. There was no human to human context there at all. And I just experienced that as a young man. And I thought to myself, and really that was the moment, I thought to myself, God, there has to be another way, maybe, you could be a leader and be sensitive. Maybe you could be a leader and have empathy. Maybe you could preach not having competition with those who work with you, but having collaboration. And maybe everyone could know what everyone else makes. Maybe everyone could know what everybody else has as far as stock or equity or whatever that might be. And if everyone has that understanding, if everybody's working within a context of collaboration and not competition, if everyone comes from empathy and wanting the other person to be successful, that might become a better working engine than the other engine.
Yeah, and obviously that's working well for you in CYTK. So talk a little bit about sort of what you're doing and how it's grown, because I think that's really instructive, because obviously you're talking about this model that people say, oh, that's the dream, but does it really work?
It's interesting because, at least for our experience, we've remained fairly small company, by the way, on purpose. What we thought was, let's not, go through a tremendous growth context for the company, but let's try to grow our revenues while keeping our team small. What would that look like? Like, how can we do that? And so we've had that great fortune to be able to remain a small company without having huge employee growth, and yet we're seeing our revenues, skyrocketing, basically. And that was all, thought out. That was the business model. Whether or not that business model would have been successful, you never know, right? But that was kind of the due process. So the big question is, could this work at scale? Like, could you have a company the size of Yelp, for example, and have infused within the ethos of those teams, what we're just talking about, openness, collaboration, love and respect, could that work at scale? And I hope at some point we find out.
Yeah. I mean, look, Yelp has a lot of those values, not necessarily the salary transparency and some of the other things, but definitely the authenticity and the respect are there. I do think there are certain things that work at scale. And then there are certain things that you have to do just, like obviously as a leader, if you've got a smaller team, you really intimately know everyone and you know how to tailor and craft sort of what you're doing for that person in the way that they're best going to receive it and all of these things. And if you have thousands of employees, that's just impossible to do that, as a single leader at scale. And then hopefully you hire the right people who all want to do that sort of in their own areas or realms or whatever, but that's a little bit harder to manage. You end up with micro cultures that some of which are a little better or easier than others, right? So
it's true. And even at our scale, which is nowhere near that, it's one thing to preach collaboration and respect, and genuine fortitude in what the other person's doing and hoping for their success. The only way really to accomplish that is you have to be a good weeder. So I'm constantly weeding the garden. So giving people a chance, giving them that amount of time, but also if I feel and our team leaders feel that individual's not working out, it's really important for the health of the engine to move on and to find other folks that are of that philosophy and want the same things and are working really hard to get there. So it's kind of a combination where it just doesn't magically happen. It's like anything. It's like tending the garden.
Yeah. And so when you have to weed, so to speak, I mean, what does that look like in your environment?
In our environment, it's usually pretty obvious. There's a context of where there's over communication happening for months on end. There's support systems that are put in place. There's a process and an understanding of trying to get that person to where they need to be. And then if that doesn't happen, then it's the hardest decision a leader can make, is to disrupt the context of that human's life and their livelihood, and disrupt everything and make that decision. It's the worst decision anyone can make. And that's why I think the hiring process is probably one of the most important processes of a business, and it's not really spoken to enough, is spending time with those that you're interested in, not hiring too quickly. I know that Steve Jobs loved to go for walks with folks that he wanted to hire. So he would come over like in the middle of the afternoon and say, hey, should we go for a walk? And they would go for a walk together. And then I do that now. I'll go for walks. I'll go for lunches. And really just, there's no way, you'll figure it all out, on a couple of walks, but you'll be surprised. Like, it's a lot different going for a walk than speaking to someone on a Zoom call.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, of course, we're doing so much more remotely now, and we're a fully remote company. And so some things don't really translate. I used to do this thing where, I'd interview people, and then a few people on the team would interview the person, depending on what the role was. Maybe there would be some notion of producing or showing a portfolio if it was marketing, or like some of these other things. So you can kind of get a sense, or filling out a questionnaire with, deeper questions. And then I would take the person either, depending on the time of day, to like coffee or to lunch or something like that. And so actually one of my close friends here, who actually moved to Denver from the San Francisco area probably 5 years ago, and now, we're located together again and hanging out a lot. I met through that process, and I said, you are not right for this job, but I would love to be friends because, we have so many things in common, and like all these things. And so I ended up with like a sort of a close friend for life, because we ended up talking for like 4 or 5 hours. Now I do not always, of course, then things get busy, or you don't always have the time in the day to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think the more time you spend, the better off you are, right? A lot of times, we're hiring people. It's essentially like being in a partnership with someone. You wouldn't marry someone after only speaking to them for 45 minutes on a Zoom call, generally.
No,
I can't imagine that that we're doing things that way, or trying to let AI make all of our hiring decisions, when there's nuances to how humans show up with each other. I think that's one place where, as much as I love AI and it's the foundation of your business, but I think, evaluating kind of how humans plug into other humans and the way that they're likely to show up is something that we need to do still.
If you actually spend any time with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever system it is you're using, and you get into this type of discussion, the AI itself will tell you that it doesn't have feelings, and it can't articulate those intricacies of humans meeting each other, creating friendships, the feelings that are around that area of creating a friendship. So the AI will say that right out of the gates. I think what a lot of folks are missing, at least on the AI topic, we don't have to spend too much time on that. God knows it's every day, all day long.
Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people are missing is that it's not, we don't have Spock from Star Trek. So the AI that we have today is a pattern recognition AI. It does a beautiful job at doing that. But it hasn't evolved to a context of self-awareness, of consciousness, like that. And it probably won't happen just with LLMs alone, large language models. It's probably going to take a lot of different things to have that happen. And that self-awareness and that conscious entity might be far different than what a human would imagine a conscious self-aware entity would be. And it might not have that same type of emotional awareness. So I think a lot of it comes from, one thing I always talk about is when I was a little boy, I went down a slide and that slide had a nut sticking out at the bottom of the slide, and that nut connected right at the end of my spine as I was going down the slide. And I was in pain basically for a year, basically.
Oh my gosh.
It was incredible pain, for a long, long time. And that was part of my journey of becoming a man, right? Of growing up. And that had nothing to do with algorithms. That had nothing to do with pattern recognition. What it had to do with was a physical context that happened in the real world, and how I absorbed that, as a human, and how I learned from that and how I grew from that. And I think those are the intricacies that, are being missed when an AI system's just trained on every novel ever written. There's a lot of other areas that need to be explored before we reach that. So
Yeah,
sorry to digress.
No, this is so fascinating because I had no idea you were going to tell this story. I've never heard it before. But like as part of my hiring process for some roles, I used to lead a sales team at my last job, which was years and years ago. And I used to often hire people who were sort of fresh out of school or even finishing school to do the sales job because I really loved the idea of like really fresh, energy, just like the go get it type of thing. But the one thing that I wanted to like sort of screen for was to figure out, like, is this a person who after 2 weeks of hearing, no, is going to like crumble, right? So I needed to understand, what adversity have you experienced in your life? What did you take from it? How did you work through it type thing? And so what I ended up with, it's so weird, but in asking that question and filtering for it, sorting for it stuff, I ended up with a team of people who had all experienced some massive sort of physical injury and like some kind of disappointment from it. So like one kid was like going to be like an Olympic skier, and then he's going down a hard run, and he like ended up taking a tumble and breaking both of his legs, and that ended his Olympic dreams and all these things, right? But like so then it was like, how did he kind of come back from it? Another gal had been thrown horseback riding and broke her back, right? And I wasn't asking, please have a physical injury so that like work here, because that's but it ended up that at this young age of life, the people who had the most emotional depth and things like that had experienced something sort of that ended up being spiritual, but that started physical in the body and then ended up spiritual, ended up intellectual, right? Like there were all these different realms that they used to process and work through that. And that's what made the most extraordinary individuals. So I'm not surprised that you have that. Because you're in fact extraordinary.
I've never had this conversation with anyone in my life on what we're just talking about right now, but it's really fascinating. Like, there's another example. I'm not going to name names, but there's another example of where one boy was given everything by the father, and then another boy. By the time that boy reached adulthood, that father had gone bankrupt and couldn't give that boy what he gave the first boy. And then 40 years later, one of the boy that was given everything and that didn't have to work for anything in life was much unhappier than the boy that was given nothing and had to work for everything. And I think this is, and that could be a girl or a boy, it doesn't matter. But I think this is along those lines of, when I started CYTK, and as we've been growing our company, there's been a few realities. I knew that it would probably take 5 to 10 years. I knew it wouldn't happen. A lot of people here in Silicon Valley where I live, oh, you've been around for 18 months and you're not, a hugely successful company yet. What, what's going on? Like, that's like the mental, outside of Silicon Valley, everyone's like, yeah, it takes 10 years. But, but inside Silicon, that's one of the thought processes that we have, for good or for bad. So I knew it was, it was going to take that long. So as we were going through the journey, and as those disappointments and those potholes were presenting itself, because I had the understanding that it was going to take a long time, I had the understanding of having multiple failures, not just one, but multiple failures of other companies that I'd worked for or had started. And I had that experience of failing. So there's been instances where, everybody's been like, let's make the left turn. And I've been like, we don't want to make that left turn. And I'm the only one basically saying, because I've made the left turn twice, before. And I saw where that left turn ended up. So, it's kind of just going through that process of failure. And I'm going to bring my dad up one last time, but my dad would say, Bryan, like, in all probability, you're going to fail at most things you try to do. Just give you a heads up there. I'm like, oh, thanks, Dad. That's great. He's like, but when actually you latch on to something that could be successful, try to make it as big and as successful as you can so that the failures don't cost you.
Yes. Well, my sister's dad is or he was before he retired. And he was my stepdad for a period of time. Long story. But anyway, he's a gold mining geologist. And he told me that most gold mining geologists fail 99.99% of the time. And then he told me, I'm one of the best gold mining geologists in the country and probably in the world. And he said, and the reason is because I fail 99.98% of the time. Because when you're finding gold, like, you don't need to find gold so many times.
Exactly.
You only need to find these big mines or these big deposits or whatever a few times in a career in order to be like wildly, like by all accounts, sort of scientifically, but also monetarily successful. Right. And so,
totally.
Yeah, I mean, and so if you think about it from that point of view, like there are a lot of professions where the failure is built in, like acting or other things. And we encourage people to not go into those professions because we don't want to encourage you to do something that has a high risk of failure. But like if you embrace the failure and you realize it's a part of your journey, like then what bigger risks will you take?
It's there's two things I want to express on that. The first one is my friend got a chance to meet with Carlos Santana. And we were young, like, he was like 27 or whatever. He goes over to Carlos's house, basically. And he was working for Sony, et cetera, et cetera. And my friend's like, Carlos, like, God, it's amazing. Like, how many beautiful songs you've had. It's just like, it's unbelievable. It's like, and Carlos was like, well, do you know how many songs I've actually have done to get to those beautiful songs that you're mentioning? And my friend's like, no, I would love to know.
Yeah.
It's like usually about 5,000.
Wow.
So just keeping that all in perspective, right? That, and then the second thing on it, there's this famous philosopher, his name's Buckminster Fuller. He's called Bucky Fuller. He was really big during the 60s and 70s. And he became famous because he was the inventor of the geodesic dome.
Yeah.
But if you get in and if you learn a little bit about Bucky, what Bucky would always talk about is life actually is mostly climbing out of the hole. Like that's what life is. Yes, you have some moments where, you're in the sun and you and I are on the beach in Hawaii and we're having, a daiquiri. That happens. But most of the time you're fucking climbing out of the hole, right? And it's if you can appreciate the climb, understand that you're on the climb, then it makes the climb a little bit easier, right? And you're maybe a little bit easier on yourself too, as you're climbing, and you're not so hard on yourself, and your expectations of yourself are just to get to that next rung on the climb instead of being this brilliant, thing that takes years and a lot of process to get to. So.
Yes. Well, I love that. And if we're in a hole, then I'm really glad that I'm in a hole with you. This has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Bryan?
Yes. The first thing is I want everyone out there to know that I am so appreciative of Kathleen and everything that she's done for me and our company through the years. A lot of times people will say they believe in you, but they don't really mean it and they don't really follow through on that. And Kathleen's not one of those people. So when you find those people in your life, cling on to them. They're very rare. So I want to say that. And I also want to thank you so much for having me on this beautiful podcast with you. And I can't wait to do it again.
Yay. Thank you so much, Bryan. Cheers.
Cheers.